And that feels like as good a cold open as any. So, hello everyone. It's episode 252 of Rail Matter. When we did the Grenfell Tower episode back in 12 episodes ago, it's taken a little longer for us to revisit it, but there's been some news, which we'll get to momentarily, that made it feel like it was the right time to get Alastair in, who was in the chat last time. But Alastair actually joined us. Alastair is in the green room as we speak, the virtual green room. Yes, we're going to talk about the recommendations from the inquiry. Kind of the latest reports from the last sort of compendia reports from the inquiry. So for this one, it's worth me saying an obvious content warning at the start, but this is going to involve descriptions and images from a residential tower fire again. So if that's the sort of thing that is upsetting for you, then be warned. You might want to listen to this, or do what you need to do. But yes, so 2017. The Grenfell Tower was destroyed by an awful fire and resulted in a huge number of its residents being killed. And it's absolutely awful. And we went through the circumstances. We went through the wide-ranging incompetence, negligence, and criminality that led to this happening. And it is a sorry tale and well worth both the W2IP episode that covered it and also our last episode 240, which was episode 240 where Alastair was in the chat. Who on earth Alastair is, you'll find out in a moment, everyone. But so we went through what happened and all the kind of what has been understood by the inquiry. Now we're going to talk about the recommendations. What specifically should we be learning from this? It's not a short list, but it's a thing that we it's worth us going through each of the recommendations, I think. In any case, everyone, with Alastair waiting patiently for me to stop waffling, we're going to get stuck in. Everyone, welcome to tonight's Rail Natter. And as the Intercity 225 fades away, we face with we start with a rather bleak image, which is the close up of the wreckage of the tower, which is two things here. Firstly, it's just an absolutely grim image. Alastair, hello, by the way. Hi. You can say things. You're welcome to hi. This is the sort of image that Alastair deals with day to day, because the person who I'm about to bring up so you can see who on earth is talking and who is in the chat for episode 240, it's Alastair Temple. It is my former university colleague, someone who I know very well, good friend, Alastair Temple. Hello, Alastair. How are you doing?
Hello.
It's grim content we're going to talk about, but no, We're here to learn, and so we can be optimistic in the sense that painfully there is going to be a lot for us to learn, and then we can then be cynical and jaded again about how much of it will actually get learned. But
I will just say, fortunately, I don't actually have to deal with images quite like that every day.
Well, quite, It's so I've written you down as fire engineer and researcher as my shorthand for what you are. But Alastair, I'll let you introduce yourself. Who are you? What is your deal? Why are you joining me to talk about Grenfell?
I didn't expect to need to have an existential crisis.
Yeah, what's your whole deal, Alastair? What is
it? Fire engineer, as you said. From when we were university together, I was doing structural with fire engineering, so it was a crossover course with you.
Yep.
I then spent a good 5 years working as a consultant fire engineer at Arup, and since then, so 2018, I would have left. I've
7 years, 7 years,
6.5 years ago.
6.5 years.
I've been working as a researcher for RISE in Sweden, in the fire research group. That's the short.
Yeah, which is
in terms of my professional aspects anyway.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we'll talk a little bit later on. We'll talk about some of the other fun stuff you get up to. But so you this is something that is, I mean, it's cut across all engineering, because this was a massive engineering disaster. And as all engineering disasters are, it was a massive systemic failure of lots of the things that we as engineers pass through, whether it's regulation or corporate interests or whatever it is. So a lot for everyone to learn. But I suppose for you in particular, that your sector in the world and the kind of the microcosm that you live within, that you work within, this was pretty pretty up there with impact globally. As I'm interested to like this. You got to go. You went abroad and saw the impact. Yeah.
Everyone everywhere. When I first moved to Sweden, essentially, there was two things people always ask me about: Brexit, yay, and then Grenfell was the other one.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
There's the two, and then even so, I don't know how much people listening will have followed the inquiry, but one of the expert witnesses that was supporting the inquiry was Barbara Lane, who was my boss when I was at Arup. So even in a direct professional note, I never worked on the team that was helping her with her expert witness stuff, but it was a large percentage of the UK fire team were for my last year out were all just that was what they did 100% of the time. So even on a literal day-to-day basis of workload wise, it had an immediately huge impact. So
like those, and we'll go through some of the recommendations. I think we'll touch on some of what those impacts look like, because obviously the industry immediately was second guessing what should we be learning. The painful thing is that most of the recommendations that I dare say we go through here, maybe not all, but certainly, as is often the case, most of the recommendations are probably things that the industry knew it ought to have been doing, and the experienced and knowledgeable people in your sector and in the wider engineering and buildings sector knew should have been happening anyway, right? It's stuff that
definitely.
It's stuff that I remember you and I talking about quite soon after Grenfell. You and I were having chats, and I remember us covering a lot of the stuff that will come up as recommendations here of problems. So again, lessons like these do not need to be written in blood. It's extremely frustrating that they end up being written in blood, but it's sorry, go on.
Some of it, even though some of it was things that you were doing as well, so it highlights to an extent the way that those of us that you could say are of the higher quality of our profession, or at least in terms of ethics and the way we work and however all sorts of these things, is you can end up being in a little bit of a bubble where you don't realize how bad other parts actually are. That is definitely true. You have an inkling of it. Some things aren't necessarily always as high quality as the work that you encounter, but you don't necessarily quite realize all of it in the same way.
And if we go back to episode 240, the extent to which the levels of which it goes way further than anyone would reasonably expect. Well, certainly further than you and I. It makes for grim reading, because you can extrapolate and imagine that it could happen, but you never think that that's practice that you would see happening, and yet, there we go. So. Also, it's worth saying a drawing. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's briefly mention the one item of news that we're going to have, which is Grenfell related, because as of the start of the month, government is still not getting the response to the Grenfell disaster right. And I'm not going to say too much about this, because I think Grenfell United have made their views quite clear on what they think should be happening with the tower. But government has said they're going to demolish the tower. They're going to demolish it. And what then happens? I mean, the immediate thing I think of is, well, there's a load of affordable housing in an otherwise very unaffordable area that will disappear and never be replaced with affordable housing again. And all the rest. But obviously, there's also the tower. My view would, I don't know. I think keeping the tower there and keeping it visible to all around is probably the best memorial, and also the best grim and unpleasant reminder of what you get wrong. What is got wrong when the systems, governments, corporate interests get on the wrong side of reality. Grenfell United have their views, and I think that their views are probably among the highest that ought to be respected, to be honest. I don't know.
No real argument. I think there's definitely arguments long term, probably about how reasonable and safe it is to leave a tower of that size with questionable structural strength and all that sort of thing. But in at least the immediate term, when there's been no prosecutions, there's been no actions on any of the recommendations, etc., etc.
It does feel like making it go away a little bit at this point. I have to say, it really does. As you say, we'll touch on this later, but there have been, in fact, let's now, have there been any major statements by either the previous or this government on actually acting on any of the recommendations. There were lots of hollow words under the previous government as these, as the reports came out. Cameron in particular said very little. He said, "Isn't it awful that this was allowed to happen?" It's like, yeah, by who, Dave? By who? But has it been anything meaningful?
There has been some changes in the way, or that will come in this year, in the way the building regs are implemented, and a little bit, I think, to do with building control. Not being a practicing engineer in the UK at the moment, I haven't quite paid as much attention to these as I would have otherwise. So I'm a little bit, not totally.
But nothing. But that's kind of fiddly bits. That's like not necessarily the big grand stuff that's really needed anyway.
None of the
it's
big
sort
grand
of dancing around the edges.
Yeah. To be fair, the recommendations aren't long out. So if they were, there's an argument, I guess, to waiting for the recommendations before trying to do anything drastic, having gone to the time and expense to do the inquiry. But there's been limited trying to preemptively work things in the directions that a lot of the recommendations are there, you'll see.
Yeah, and also there hasn't been a statement of we will carry out all of the recommendations of the report. No one has made that commitment.
Not that I have seen anyway.
No. Which is very frustrating. So but we'll get into this because as I bring our two little faces up in the corner, we have to go back to the report. And we'd gone through the report, we'd reached the recommendations part of the report, and I will fling up the report itself. So chapter 113 is the recommendations, and we're going to go through these. I think it's about 15 pages of recommendations here, and a decent amount of kind of spiel. I don't have a particular plan for this. I think we'll go through. I think what I'll probably do is pick out some of the bits that the kind of the lead sentences in paragraphs that look like they're pertinent, and then talk around the recommendations themselves are highlighted in black, so it's quite easy to pop up, or kind of they're in bold, so it's kind of easy to pick those up and then read around them. But with no particular plan, I think we'll crack on and go through. So I'll just start by reading out the context, because I think it's worth doing that. We're invited by our terms of reference to recommend measures to be taken in response to any deficiencies we found to exist in the matters under investigation. We have grouped our recommendations by reference to the subject matter to which they relate. So basically, we're going to go through kind of there's a bit of a story being told. Again, like we did in the previous episode, there is a bit of a story that will follow here. So we're going to start with the construction industry, and we'll kind of keep working through those recommendations. So I'm going to crack on, and I'll just stop me at any point you want to. Just stop me, and So
also, if you want any,
yes, I'll nudge you if I have. Yeah, well,
explanations.
Yes, that's it. So as I'll do my fast reading voice as ever, but when I'm picking up the reading. So as appears from the findings in our report, we are satisfied that the system of regulating the construction and refurbishment of high-rise residential buildings that existed at the time of the Grenfell Tower fire was seriously defective in a number of respects. That's an interestingly worded sentence. They lead you on. You're like, satisfied. They're satisfied about something. Oh, they're satisfied that it's a shit show. Okay, understood. Yeah, right, fine. And this talks about the fact that the approved document B, that that guidance was poorly worded. If everyone remembers back to episode 240, there are a few of these key kind of guidance documents and standards that were followed, and in a way kind of conflicted or provided or if you like provided a route to a more lenient result that was still compliant.
I would say the approved document B, from my own feeling, is not the best document in this respect when it comes to the external facades. I do also have a feel that if people had wanted to stop and think about the implications of what they were doing and the way they were doing it, and whether that was actually probably what the people had been thinking about when they wrote the approved document B,
people were doing that thing where they live by the letter of the law rather than the actual intent, which is a thing that standard in engineering. It's a constant refrain, isn't it? You have this battle with standards where people like to, particularly when it's corporate interest, they like to fall back to, no, what does the standard actually say? You're like, well, this is what the standard's trying to say, and in fairness to people who create standards, they know that's happening, and so it is incumbent on standards creators to limit that kind of grey area as much as they can.
There's definitely no excuses on that one. But there was a lot of willful finding routes.
I suppose what
that was convenient for reasons other than the safety. And then the other thing about approved document B, which I think a lot of people willfully forget, or did in the industry, is that it's a guidance document.
Yes.
The things that you actually are supposed to meet are the functional requirements of the building regulations, which the recommendations we'll discuss in a second. And so one of the first things that anybody should be doing when you use any sort of guidance or tool is go, is this appropriate and relevant to use in my situation? And if it isn't, then you don't use it.
Yep, absolutely.
Or if some parts of it might be relevant and some parts aren't, you don't use those bits.
Yeah, this is it.
Anyway.
It's absolutely, and this plays into the fact that engineers are not, as an engineer, my role isn't do what standard says. Even standards, even the even beyond that, like legislative requirements, are still those are the legislative minima or maxima. They are not like, that's not you're not an engineer if you just follow those rules. As an engineer, it is incumbent to you to understand the context by which those standards exist, understand where they've come from, and understand how they're supposed to be applied. And of course, that's absolutely true for guidance. And I dare say the guidance will say that. With every guidance document generally will say that in its like on the inside cover, it will say this is a guidance document. It should not, here are caveats, here reference standards.
Part of approved document B says something along the lines of for more common types of buildings or more common buildings or something like that. Yeah, obviously. Interpret that how you will, I guess.
Yeah, quite. Well,
or, unfortunately, people did interpret that how they will.
Yeah, how they wanted to. Yeah, exactly. So, the remarks that follow are directed to the system for ensuring safety from fire, but we have no reason to think that other aspects of building safety are not subject to similar considerations. So safety of people in the built environment depends principally on a combination of three primary elements: good design, the choice of suitable materials, and sound methods of construction, each of which depends in turn in a large measure on a fourth, the skill, knowledge, and experience of those engaged in the construction industry. So those 3/4 things are good design, choice of suitable materials, sound methods of construction, and skilled, knowledgeable, and experienced people, practitioners engaging in the construction industry. I think I have nothing to disagree with there. That's very true. That's a very sort of 3D buildings type arrangement. But that is kind of nominally correct.
I would say there is a fifth, but less related to the construction of the buildings, and then that goes into maintenance and upkeep and
management and absolutely.
But less related to the construction of the original building.
Yes,
which I guess is what they're targeting here.
Yeah. That's a very good point. This is why we've got Al on. He's an engineer. He does this stuff. It's 2 engineers on a podcast. It's very dangerous territory. That 2 civil engineers who studied together, lived together. Actually, we never lived together.
Well, we did for like.
I did for
2 months in the last summer.
That's true. And also are from grew up in the Shire, so a very, very dangerous situation for the podcast. Yeah. Anyway, so we think that over the course of time, the arrangements under which the construction industry was regulated have become too complex and fragmented. Oh, that sounds familiar. That sounds familiar to anyone in engineering, certainly in the railways. That is absolutely true. We're lucky in the railway world we inflicted a load of complexity that resulted in some very high-profile fatal derailments. And actually, overall safety was kind of still on a general improving trend at the time, but we had these very high prominent, and then we sort of reversed a lot of that complexity we'd introduced. There are other things at play, but certainly, so we've been through that pain. So it's interesting, that it's just true for every sector, that complex and complexity and fragmentation is absolutely counterintuitive. It suits free market ideologues to create all those fragments because that's how you get competitiveness or whatever, but that doesn't suit the real world. That suits anyway, Tufton Street theory. So let's crack. So the regulation, there's a load. We go through like a series of basically saying, in our view, all the functions to which we've referred, as well as some others to which we've referred below, should be exercised by a single independent body headed by a person whom, for the sake of convenience, we shall call a construction regulator. This is very interesting because, again, on the railway, we had all sorts of stuff spread out, and then we brought a lot of it back into the ORR and the RSSB, and also created the RAIB at the time as well. So it's interesting. Regulator juggle. Creating one regulator is not perfection, by the way. You can still absolutely get regulatory capture. You still have all the challenges, but at least you get rid of the things they'd highlighted previously about complexity and fragmentation. So I'm going to jump to the recommendation here, which is, we therefore recommend that the government draw together under a single regulator all the functions relating to the construction industry to which we have referred. which is
I
interesting,
think those
actually.
bullet points are probably worth quickly
Oh, okay,
going
yeah,
through,
go
to
for
be
it.
honest.
So these are we envisage that such a construction regulator would have sufficient resources to take on the following functions, most of which are currently discharged by one or other of a variety of bodies: the regulation of construction products, A; B, the development of suitable methods for testing the reaction to fire of materials and the products intended for use in construction. C, the testing and certification of such products. D, the issue of certificates of compliance of construction products with the requirements of legislation, statutory guidance, and industry standards. E, the regulation and oversight of building control. F, the licensing of contractors to work on high-risk buildings. G, monitoring the operation of the building regulations and the statutory guidance and advising the Secretary of State on the need for change. Good, yes. H, carrying out research on matters affecting fire safety in the built environment. 2, right. Oh, wait a minute. Feels like lots of these did have one person who did them before.
Yeah.
I, collecting information both in this country and abroad on matters affecting fire safety. Absolutely. J, exchanging information with the fire and rescue services on matters affecting fire safety. Absolutely. K, accrediting fire risk assessors. And L, maintaining a publicly available library of test data and publications. This is all good stuff, and I agree with it. It would be quite a substantial scope. That would be more scope, like a greater remit than I think a lot of other regulators adjacent to engineering currently have, actually, because a few of those things are done by professional institutions, for example, rather than... So, the ICE do some of this stuff that they've listed off here, and
yes,
BSI does other stuff, so the British Standards Institute, a private entity that should never have been a private entity. We've already talked about the buildings. Oh God, what the other one? The buildings and the other regulator, the buildings one that's got multiple like 5 letters in it. That is so. The point of this is they are spread out. It would make some sense to unify it.
Yeah.
Bream, not Bream. Anyway, yeah. So all of these make some good sense to unify. What's interesting is actually, again, overlap with railways, is that a lot of this would be... I mean, I would start needing to worry about what this regulator has to say, because I dare say a lot of the stuff that we do in construction would fall under the remit of... And I'd be interested to know how it would relate to CDM, whether it would become... what its relationship would be to CDM as an organisation. Because CDM is an HSE, is broadly an HSE-owned bit of guidance.
Yeah, no, I don't think...
CDM, by the way, construction design...
it would be... Yeah. It wouldn't really be that much overlap, because this is far more to do with... Not necessarily to do with how you go about managing your construction in the way CDM is. But it's more to do with who is appropriate to do it.
Yep.
And then, like, you'll get on to it later on, some of these things get touched on again, and there's things like making sure we actually have a database of tests.
Yeah,
stuff.
Okay, yeah.
Like that sort of style. So when people are getting a product tested, instead of it being go to whichever commercial lab you think is going to be easiest to get your product past that, not publish any failed test data and just publish the certificate that you get from your past test, not necessarily even the test that you passed it on, which is something that when I was working as a consultant engineer, was one of the most infuriating things when you're trying to specify products, was trying to get hold of actual test data, test reports to establish if the thing that was claiming a certain level of performance achieved it in a way that made sense for the context in which you're trying to use it.
Yep.
So all of those sorts of things. It's much more about gathering all of that together rather than necessarily saying how you manage your
okay. So it's
project.
So it's quite, in a way, quite design focused. It is quite design focused then, actually. So it's quite focused on the specification and design of building projects.
I guess you could say that, but also
but also maintenance and
competencies.
Yes. Okay. Yep. Yeah, so I'll be very interested to see what if such a body is created, then I'll be very interested to see what that looks like, and certainly it'd be a thing that engineers, civil engineers, other engineers across across sectors need to be absolutely aware of and understand the implications. For example, Network Rail does product approval in relating to, and included within that is fire capability of materials and technologies. So it'd be interesting to understand some of the overlap and how that might work. But equally, then Network Rail doesn't oversee product approval of like certain types of cladding it uses on its station buildings. So I'm interested to. So that's a key recommendation. There is the creation of this single regulator, construction regulator, as the inquiry are calling it.
And then the next point talks about what they define as high-risk buildings.
Yes.
And the new Building Safety Act saying it's over 18 metres. They say that should actually just reference the height. It's not sufficient because it's a bit arbitrary. And it's on the next page. You'll see.
Okay. Yeah. So the recommendation: we therefore recommend that the definition of a high-risk building for the purposes of the Building Safety Act be reviewed urgently. Oh, crikey, that's quite, to use the word urgently like this is like, go in and change this. It is an ineffective way to classify a building as high risk to just say if it's 18 meters or higher. Yeah. Okay.
It's about how the ability for people to evacuate or for people to deal with a fire or whatever those things are. And I guess you could even go beyond people. And if you start looking at energy infrastructure, for example, how critical entirely unrelated to life safety is, you could even start looking at risk for other things as well as life safety and go for like critical infrastructure, for example. You might consider high risk because the knock-on impacts from it
could either be safety or they're just significant economic impact, or it's knock out power to a hospital, or you knock out power to, or indeed knock out the operation of critical transport infrastructure, for example. If it's a big signaling, a signaling center that is taller than 18, is shorter than 18 meters, but exactly. So absolutely. So we're now into the next bit, which is government. That'd be interesting. Let's see. So I'm going to jump straight to the recommendation, and then we can maybe dive back up. Well, I'll read the first sentence first. The fragmentation of responsibility for regulating the construction industry is currently mirrored in the range of government departments responsible for matters affecting fire safety. If a single body were responsible for all aspects of regulating matters affecting fire safety in the construction industry, that body should report to a single Secretary of State answerable to Parliament for all aspects of fire safety. So, we therefore recommend that the government bring responsibility for the functions relating to fire safety currently exercised by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, the Home Office and the Department for Business and Trade into one department under a single Secretary of State. So they haven't said which one it should be, but they have said that it should be within one of the bodies. And I don't know. I think that our structure of government is kind of stupid anyway. I think that a lot of our government departments make absolutely no sense, and I've got quite strong views on how you would fix that. There would be something like a Home Office that we'd retain, although I wouldn't call it that anymore. Business and trade might not be a bad one, actually, necessarily, even though that you might think, but what about the business interests? Like, well, yes and no. Like, actually, a lot of stuff has been traditionally within railway safety was traditionally managed by the Board of Trade, and so it's not entirely unreasonable that is retained there. Yeah. But equally, housing you might want to have house. So I don't know. There are arguments for it being in either what is now MHCLG,
an entirely different one as yet unnamed, because
exactly.
Let's face it, governments like creating and closing departments and sub-departments all the time.
They do, it's a shame they don't do it with the one that they ought to, kneecap and set fire to. But anyway, so Chief Construction Advisor, Treasury. The Minister will need to be able to turn for advice to someone who has a good working knowledge and practical experience of the construction industry. We've therefore recommended that the Secretary of State appoint a Chief Construction Advisor with a sufficient budget and staff to provide advice on all matters affecting the construction industry. We have Chief Science Advisors and stuff. I don't see any. This seems like a very sensible thing to do, particularly for a country that is constantly claiming and has done under at least two, if not four administrations, that we're going to build Britain or build better back or whatever it is. Feels like we ought to have someone who is an advisor to to elements of that process that impact on burning people alive. So having a chief construction advisor feels like a good idea.
Making sure buildings stand up and all of the other construction things. It would make a lot of sense.
And also saving money, because if you build buildings that are crap, and even if you don't cause anyone any harm, they have to get demolished. And rebuilt at extreme carbon and financial cost and delay to the building being of any utility, which results in lost opportunity costs.
Or just spending vast quantities of money on maintaining them and fixing them all the time.
Yes. See also the cladding debacle ongoing right now in the enormous costs to both individuals and organisations in crazy things like just having a guy who sits in a car on the other side of the street looking at the building. because that's been decided that that's the most effective way to keep the building safe. Fantastic. I'm a bloke and I'm in a car and that building isn't on fire. Yeah. Okay, thanks, mate. Terrific. So there we go. Absolutely makes sense for there to be a chief construction advisor. That's very sensible. So that's a fairly straightforward one. They monitor all aspects of the department's work relating to building regulations and statutory guidance. They provide advice to the SOS on request, and they bring to the attention of the Secretary of State any matters affecting building regulations and statutory guidance, or matters affecting the construction industry more generally, of which the government should be aware. Very good. Very similar to the chief science advisor. Like that's the deal. Is like stuff that's important or pertinent to government. Highlight it to them, and have an office that allows you to do that. Legislation and guidance. Okay, so nothing we've discovered in the course of our investigations has led us to think that expressing the legal requirements of the building regulations in terms of functional requirements is in itself unsatisfactory. However, we do think that the way in which the statutory guidance in approved document B was expressed was unsatisfactory in a number of respects. So, okay, we've gone through that in some detail. Most importantly, we do not think that approved document B provides the information needed to design buildings that are safe in fire. There's the crucial one. I'm going to read this next line because of the people who I recognise the names of in it, who are all lecturers that I've dealt with, or they are your former boss.
And two previous
so
lecturers.
Approved document B needs to be reviewed as a matter of urgency, taking into account the expert evidence of Professor Luke Bisbee, Professor Jose Terrero, and was it Barbara Lane, Dr. Barbara Lane?
Yeah.
Who is So Barbara Lane, your former boss. Professor Jose Terrero is a guy who you cannot speak to him without there being flame in the background of the conversation. That's just the truth. And Luke Bisbee is someone who I sent my first email to an academic professor as a student, and I emailed him saying lethal bizzle in the email because he'd asked us to. So that's... It's good to have cool people who do this stuff. So those are people who we should be paying attention to. Anyway, it's slightly weird to be connected to two of those people directly.
But all three of those people are actually very good at what they do, and also there are numerous videos of them giving various talks at various points on YouTube and all around the internet. And if anyone's interested in any of this stuff, well worth a listen to any of the three of them.
Jose Terrero's one is there's several very good lectures that Professor Terrero has done there. But I imagine all three. Yeah, I've not actually looked up anything by LB for a while. So anyway, I'm sure there must be. There must be.
Good university lecturer anyway. He knows how to hold an audience.
Yeah, indeed. They're both for anyone who's. They were both at Edinburgh while Alastair and I were at Edinburgh. That's why we'd know them. I don't know if Luke. I don't think either. I know Jose Terrero went off to Australia for a bit or something like that. And
Luke's still there.
Luke is still there. Okay, yeah, fab. So. We therefore recommend that the statutory guidance generally and approved document B in particular be reviewed accordingly and a revised version published as soon as possible. So that's fairly straightforward. It's a response to the quality of that document in line with expert feedback. Our investigations have shown that the levels of competence in the construction industry are generally low. Ooh, there's a sentence. And that by the time of the Grenfell Tower fire, many contractors, designers, and building control officers treated the statutory guidance as containing a definitive statement of legal requirements. So really, it's basically saying people, practitioners across this sector, whether engineers or otherwise, have fallen out of having competence and have fallen into just doing what the guidance document said and losing touch with the connection with it. That's kind of what that seems to be implying, and that would seem to line up with what was said in the previous report. As you say, Al, it might be isolated pockets of excellence, like the fire safety team at Arup is a known centre of excellence in the UK, and there are pockets of very high quality. Yeah, but broadly across the whole sector, actually, the understanding is very poor around this stuff. And needs to be greatly improved and professionalised. So we therefore recommend that a revised version of the guidance contain a clear warning in each section that the legal requirements are contained in the building regulations. Exactly as you were saying earlier, Al. Like, this is only a guidance document. Go away and read the standards, you oik. And that compliance with the guidance will not necessarily result in compliance with them. It's just
think about where you're applying that guidance to.
Yep.
Does it make sense in the context of your actual building?
Yeah. We do not think it's appropriate for us to recommend specific changes to approved document B, save in one respect. Okay, that's quite reasonable. I think that's quite reasonable. They're like, nope, it's not for us to do that, except one bloody thing. And the point that they say is new materials and methods of construction and the practice of overcladding existing buildings makes the existence of effective compartmentation a questionable assumption, and we recommend that it be reconsidered when approved document B is revised. So the specifics of that is, and then there's a later recommendation tied to that, which is we recommend that the guidance draw attention to the need to make a calculation of that kind, that kind being calculating the likely rate of fire spread and the time required for evacuation.
Yeah, it's to do with the stay put strategy.
Okay, yeah.
So the stay put strategy, for those who don't know, essentially is if you have a fire in one flat, you have designed your building such that the fire stays within the confines of that flat until it can be fought or is self-extinguished, and everyone else in the building does not need to evacuate.
Yep.
Where secondary bonuses of like if someone burns their toast and sets off a fire alarm,
you don't
all the fire alarms in the entire building don't suddenly go off and everyone needs to go out.
Yep.
But that only works if you don't then have a method of bypassing that compartmentation between your different flats via a very combustible external wall, for example.
Yeah. So that sentence, I was reading about, like, basically saying shoving a load of stuff that links up all of your flats on the outside of the building means that you cannot say that you have an effectively compartmentalized building. That's me slightly rewording the sentence, right?
Yeah, essentially. So if you have not either done a calculation or specified your building in such a way where, I don't know, it's all completely blockwork and brick and there is nothing combustible on that external flat, and you have big enough gaps between your windows that you are very confident then in all but the very most extreme cases, which are, well, you'll know as an engineer, you can't design for every single eventuality ever. There are always things that you can't. So you can always make something fail if you really try.
Oh yeah, if you really throw things at it.
Excluding those, if you've done something so that you can be incredibly confident that under all reasonable worst case scenarios, you won't get fire spread because there is literally nothing that burns and your windows are far apart that you won't get flame jumping between one another, then you probably don't need to do a calculation of any sorts. If you have, on the other hand, got things which there is potential for fire spread because there is stuff that burns in there, and it might burn fast, it might burn slowly, it might be small patches, it might be large patches. You need to actually check that you're not just giving a route.
Do the work. Yeah, the thing you're referring to earlier. Go on, yeah.
Or you do a simultaneous evacuation strategy. And you just say if there's a fire or a fire alarm goes off in this building at any time,
everyone gets out. Yeah. Yep.
And then you have to make sure that your management stuff's put in place so that all of the fire alarms and everything is connected and is managed appropriately through the life of the building. Because you can't then rely on the individual flat owners to just maintain their own stuff.
Yep.
Because everyone else is relying on them. And so on, the knock-on effects. And this is why you've got to you always have to think about all these fire things, and I'm sure it's the same for everything. They're systems. They work. They have knock-on effects on each other. When you make a decision in one place, it has an influence in another place, and you need to think about all of these things in connection and not just go, have I ticked this box?
The legal test you're referring to earlier, or the test as engineers have, certainly in the railways, and I think this is broadly, the language is very similar across fields, is there's two tests, they're the same really, which is ALARP is the main one, which is as low as reasonably practicable, and the other is so far as is reasonably practicable. It's two tests. Those they're the same test really. They come up. They are the legal. If I'm being cross-examined as with something having happened, the test on what I've done as an engineer is that I've discharged my skill and care to deal with any circumstance, to reduce risk to be as low as reasonably practicable. And that's kind of what you're referring to earlier about, like, if you're confident that the risk is as low as reasonably practicable, that you're going to have fire reaching out, and then fine. But windows are sufficiently far apart and there is no but combustible stuff on the outside of the building, then great. But as soon as you have put the stuff, as you say, work the numbers, understand what's going to happen. And if you can't understand what's going to happen, then employ someone who can, or change the design, so that it's within your competence. So we think that a fresh approach needs to be taken to reviewing and revising the building regulations and statutory guidance that is driven primarily by considerations of safety. That feels like a strange sentence to have to write, to be honest, but it's indicative of what an unhealthy condition the building regs had got to. Fresh minds are needed. We therefore recommend that as far as possible, membership of bodies advising on changes to statutory guidance should include representatives of the academic community as well as those with practical experience of the industry, including fire engineers. Woo, it's you. You're on the telly. Chosen for their experience and skill and should extend beyond those who have served on similar bodies in the past. This is kind of saying the people who are in those bodies and are basically easy to pay off, in some cases literally, but in broadly in a metaphorical sense, that they are cozy, they're chums with the people who are there signing stuff off or writing, or they providing, as was the case in the detailed speaking to private organizations and explaining how they can best work with and around those regulations. That's appalling, and goodbye to that as quickly as possible. Right, next bit, fire safety strategy. So this is relating to what you've just been talking about of that management piece and this the whole system. The Grenfell Tower refurbishment failed to understand properly the need for a fire safety strategy and therefore failed to ensure that a final version of the outlined fire safety strategy begun by Exova was completed. So it allowed the building to be in a dangerous condition on completion. So the recommendation related to this is, we therefore recommend that it be made a statutory requirement that a fire safety strategy produced by a registered fire engineer, see below, is submitted with building control applications at a particular gateway within the process of signing the designs off, I would assume. Gateway 2, I presume, is similar to like GRIP in the railways engineering stages. For the construction or refurbishment...
I think that wording has slightly changed since I was doing this on a regular basis, to be honest. But
similar vibe. Like it'll be an engineering stage, a stage of sign off of a design and approval process. For the construction or refurbishment of any higher risk building, and for it to be reviewed and resubmitted at the stage of completion. Gateway. So these different gateways, I presume. Damn, what again? I can't remember what the organisation that administers those standards is. But anyway, the design process is as such. REBA. Is it REBA?
Yeah,
who will administer those?
REBA have their stages of work, but gateways are something else.
Oh, really? Okay.
So that's to do with building controls sign off rather than.
Okay. So it's like an assurance process rather than the design stages. Understood. Okay, I can't catch myself on that one. Then. Okay, yeah. So the recommendation there is the need to have a strategy produced by a competent person who will be a registered fire engineer. That's the so being a registered fire engineer, is that saying? Well, maybe we'll find out.
That's coming up. There is no such thing currently.
Okay, noted.
It is not a protected title of any sort. Okay, so anyone can say they're a fire engineer at the moment.
Including you. Will you have to not be a fire engineer? Will you have to be a fire adjacent engineer?
We'll find out.
Well, you're not in the UK, so it's not so critical at this point. You can be what you like at this point.
Technically, my job title currently is research and development engineer. So make of that what you will.
Well, yeah, indeed. Currently, my official job title is project manager. So make of that what you will. But anyway,
I was that for a while here when I first joined.
We will find out that people's job titles, people chuck around job titles as willy nilly in a situation where they ought not to. And as you say, we'll find out in a minute why this registered fire engineer role is going to be important. Is by being specific about these roles is actually very important. Assessing the fire performance of an external wall requires reliable information about the products and materials proposed for use in its construction. So we're talking about fire performance tests now. So very much back into the Professors Bisbee and Torero joining hands and shouting at everyone. I don't know why they're joining hands, but why not? And basically the two of them setting out. In a way, it's a good thing that they've had a chance to actually be listened to. They've been doing testing through the university and screaming to industry that changes need to happen for a very long time. I remember both of them will have worked on the massive, soon to be demolished Glasgow flat fire test.
Kilmarnock test. Yeah. Big
tests being done that were very interesting and brought a lot of the engineering and scientific understanding of these processes was improved greatly by that testing, right? That was forefront testing, and it was now 20 years ago or something. I don't know, okay, maybe not quite that long. It happened before we started uni, but it was only a couple of years before, something like
just before.
So mid 2000s,
or when we were in our first. Could have been when we were in our first year or something, but it was done by the time.
I hate to break it to you, Al, but that is nearly 20 years ago.
Yeah.
just to break that one to you. Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, old bastard. Right. Anyway, so it is apparent from the experiments conducted by Professor Bisbee and Professor Turner for phase 2 of our investigations. Oh, they did experiments for it. The factors that affect the way in which fire spreads over ventilated rain screen external wall systems are complex, and understanding them is an evolving science. Intuitive judgments are often wrong because a small change in the system can have a significant effect on the outcome. So it's quite clear that like the understanding of these systems was clearly not at the level of people's confidence in how they were deploying them. Right, there's clearly a gap there. We were using stuff that we did not understand.
Well, it is one of the things with fire that you possibly have some in the rail, but maybe a little bit less so. But in fire is quite a chaotic process. Yeah, in that it has huge amounts of very small things happening very fast all at once, which makes it much more like a complex. Everything about fire is like a complex system behavior, nearly. Once you get past basic combustion, but past the fire triangle, beyond that point, it gets very, very complicated. Even if you go into combustion now that we're using timber increasingly and stuff, combustion of timber, just the combustion part, very, very complicated. So I mean, the wheel rail interface is extremely complex. I'd say there is an analogy between like fire and the wheel rail interface. But it's not as chaotic. It isn't as chaotic. Like it's as complex, but it is not as chaotic. Yes, it is another engineer. It's probably the most complex engineering interface out there, the wheel rail interface, because you've got you've got two elliptical shapes of steel that has been partially liquefied by pressure in a very localized area. Impacted by the crystal structures of the steel, which themselves change temporarily and in some cases permanently with that contact. So there's a lot of stuff going on at that interface. But it's still, if you had a good enough computer, you could model it. Well, I suppose that's true for fire, actually. If you get enough variables in, you can model it with increasing accuracy, but it just becomes busy. So there are some analogies between those two. It's just that for the most part in railway engineering, you don't have to worry too much about whereas in fire you do. Whereas in railways, you kind of broadly the assumptions, like yes, in the long term, because railways are a dynamic system. Yes, the outcomes in terms of maintenance and potentially safety are a thing, but for the most part, you can just assume I've put the rails in the right place. I've followed the standards. This is done. Whereas in fire, it's not. It isn't that simple. Yeah, I guess the other thing is you find out a lot quicker if you've done it wrong. Yeah, you get corrugations, and your ultrasonic tests come back saying this rail has become absolutely shagged after 5 minutes, or my crossing nose is totally unzipped. What happened? Whereas we could theoretically do something wrong and never find out until it bursts into flames. Or never find out until the building is demolished in 150 years, and you still don't know because you've moved on. Yeah, fair point. So we therefore recommend that steps be taken in conjunction with the professional and academic community to develop new test methods that will provide the information needed for such assessments to be carried out reliably. So new test methods required, which is some of the stuff that you do in your day job, right? Understanding and improving, or at least within the group. Yeah, within the group. In the light of Professor Jose Torrero's evidence in particular, we think that British Standard 9414 will encourage people who are not trained fire engineers to think that they can safely assess the performance of a proposed external wall system by extrapolation from information obtained from tests. Don't do that. So we recommend that the government make it clear that that standard should not be used as a substitute for an assessment by a suitably qualified fire engineer. Again, we'll get there in a minute. Certification of products and publication of test data. It is essential that those responsible for designing buildings have access to reliable information about the materials and products they wish to use. So, manufacturers were able to use misleading marketing material in part because the certification bodies that provided assurance to the market of the quality and characteristics of the products failed to ensure that the statements in the certificates they issued were accurate and based on appropriate and relevant test evidence. Ouch. Anyway, we've covered all this stuff. So the recommendation from this is we therefore recommend that the construction regulator should be responsible for assessing the conformity of construction products with the requirements of legislation, statutory guidance, and industry standards, and issue certificates as appropriate. So the new regulator that has been created, this construction regulator, should be responsible for that process for understanding whether construction products are okay to use, essentially. But the next one is really the big one. Okay, yeah. In our view, in my opinion, as a from my experience, because this is what is going to allow you to work out how applicable that certification and test standards is to your use case when you're going in.
Yeah, so in our view, clarity is required to avoid those who rely on certificates of conformity being misled. We therefore recommend, 3-part recommendation here. A, that copies of all test results supporting any certificate issued by the construction regulator be included in the certificate. You've already put your head in your hands about how frustrating that was previously.
Yeah.
So that's a key good recommendation. B, that manufacturers be required to provide the construction regulator with the full testing history of the product or material to which the certificate relates, and inform the regulator of any material circumstances that may affect its performance. So they can't just delete the dud tests. That seems like that's what that one is. They have to say the full testing history. How did this perform? And C, manufacturers be required by law to provide on request copies of all test results that support claims about fire performance made for their products. Yeah, this is a key one. This feels like a really, really key one. This should make it much more difficult for manufacturers to lie about their shit products.
Or to take one even where they're not directly lying, mislead by taking one specific test where it achieved a good result in a very specific configuration,
riveted rather than laminated or whatever. Like this material is great, and it's referring to just like the layer tested on its own and not as part of the overall system. Yeah,
or the particular system they tested on had a particular backing to it, where it performs really well with that particular backing. And if you change that backing, it performs really, really badly. But because they've got one test where it passed, then they then market the key part of their product, which may be say a rain screen cladding. You might hang it on, but you then can have different substrates behind it which aren't part of the rain screen cladding but can be very important
to the behavior
of the whole facade system. But the cladding manufacturer has one test where they did it with one one substrate, and it works really well, so they market it on the basis of that, but it might not perform the same on it every substrate. But as the substrate's not something that's provided by them, they don't need to include it within their system. But it's very important to know as when you're specifying something, or if you're trying to say if that one's actually going to meet your specification, that nuance.
Yeah, that's understanding that is exactly. So that is a key recommendation. And then we're about to get into this fire engineers thing, because then that ties us back to the people who are able to sign off firstly on the strategy for the building. So that's like managing the safety strategy, but also then presumably some of the competence in signing off on, well, we'll get there. So designing buildings that are safe in the event of a fire requires particular skill. It is a skill that can be acquired only by specialized education and experience worthy of formal recognition. Unfortunately, the term fire engineer does not at present denote any formal qualification. It's funny that I put fire engineer on the little big face thing. So that's my face. Go away that. The fire engineer and researcher. I should put fire engineer (?) and researcher there, right?
I have a degree in fire safety engineering.
Well, we'll see what they require of you to keep calling yourself a fire engineer in a minute. As a result, it's possible for a person to practice as a fire engineer without any formal qualification. Al does have formal qualifications, everyone. I can vouch for that. I saw him get stressed about exams. The evidence we have heard suggests that not all those who profess to be fire engineers are capable of performing that role competently, and that the complexity of the subject matter is not well understood. In those circumstances, and particularly given the importance of fire engineers in ensuring the safety of life, we think that the profession of fire engineer should be formally recognised, and that both the title and the function should be protected by statute. So this kind of peels fire engineers away from civil engineers at this point. It almost like turns it into its own thing, which I think is quite a sensible thing to do.
Well, they're entirely different sets of knowledge.
Yeah.
And even within fire engineering, there's huge difference of subsets. But I couldn't design some groundworks, for example. So
yeah, absolutely. So over time, over time that would create a body of registered fire engineers who are capable of contributing to the design and delivery of safe buildings, and of educating those construction professionals with whom they work in effective fire safety strategies. So it's interesting. So this fire engineer a lot of it seems to be relating not to engineering, consulting and design engineers as we think of them, Al, but also it seems to be thinking about a lot about the assurance and the people management, if you like, the evacuation strategy side of things as well. So
I mean, that is a huge. The fire safety strategy is the main thing that a consultant fire engineer.
Oh, really? Okay.
Does.
Yeah.
And so, that then, because all of these things all have to link together, and then within that fire safety strategy, you have a whole host of different sub-things, and that will cover everything from means of escape, so evacuation, detection and alarm, structural behaviour,
to how the fire brigade treat and how the fire service have to respond to the fire, things like
less, not in terms of firefighting, the strategy that they take on the ground, but in terms of ensuring there is appropriate access.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it captures all of those different things, and they all interlink. So, and that's the key thing about it being a strategy, is all these things interlink, and then different ones you might, depending on your building and depending on your case, you might have to do more or less calculations, and more can take prescriptive things and or not prescriptive things, or
So what's interesting here is that this is one of the problems with engineering not being a protected role within the UK. Because you can just buy a van and sellotape the word civil engineering on the side of the van.
Yeah.
And people and all you do and all you've got in the back is a couple of shovels, and you can lay a few bricks, and it's like, I don't want to degrade the ability of tradespeople who do those things, but that's not civil engineering, and it causes similar. It has the potential to cause similar issues. I suppose the specifics here referring to fire engineers has very specific consequences in the death of a lot of people, and this disaster and many others, frankly. But it feels like it ticks to a broader challenge in the UK of the fact that the word engineer is not hugely well understood, and certainly not well protected in terms of the people who hold that title and describe themselves as engineers. That feels like a broader issue, actually, that is being highlighted by this specific case. So the recommendation here is we therefore recommend that the profession of fire engineer be recognised and protected by law, and that an independent body be established to regulate the profession, define the standards required for membership, maintain a register of members, and regulate their conduct. That feels like they're describing a professional engineering institution. Isn't there already a professional engineering institution for fire engineers? Isn't there the Institution of Fire Safety Engineering?
There is the Institution of Fire Engineers.
Oh, okay.
It is a professional institution. It is under the Engineering Council.
Yep.
So you can become a chartered member.
Yep.
And nominally have to have all the things, but it also has quite a broad definition of what it allows in membership. So you have everything from, you can have people who are not necessarily what we would call fire engineers in this context.
Yep.
Even if they are highly qualified fire specialists in other contexts.
Okay, yeah, I suppose in the age of avoiding duplication, it might make sense to work with the institution to understand whether they, understanding whether they work with that registration and how they relate to this a new organisation. But what they've described, they're a professional engineering institution. That's what's been described in that recommendation.
Yeah, but with a more stringent place in law.
Yes, exactly. That's the key difference to the current. Yeah, agreed. In order to speed up the creation of a body of professional fire engineers, we also recommend that the government take urgent steps to increase the number of places on high-quality master's level courses. Oh, there's double space there. Master's level courses in fire engineering accredited by the professional regulator. Oh, so everyone's off to Edinburgh again, and Edinburgh with one of the, if not the leading, or certainly was when we were there, is one of the top three fire engineering establishments in the UK for the masters. I don't know where was better. Possibly like Imperial or UCL might have had another better one, and maybe Cambridge. I don't know.
Imperial does a lot of stuff now. Or at least it does postgrad wise. I don't know what they do undergrad wise. Another lecturer you'll recognise runs all the stuff down in Imperial. Guillermo Rain.
Oh yeah, Guillermo. Oh yeah, he's a friendly chap. Yeah, okay, there we go. Yeah. Anyway, these are all Edinburgh people, because Edinburgh actually was a bit like York is for health economics. Edinburgh was that for fire, like one of the key global, like best in the world type places. Okay, so Other construction professionals and more senior members of the fire and rescue services need to have a basic understanding of the principles of fire engineering as they apply to the built environment. Okay, so the development and maintenance of a statement of professional skills should ultimately be the responsibility of the body that regulates the profession, but pending the establishment of such a body, we recommend that the government convene a group of practitioner and academic fire engineers and such other professionals as it thinks fit to produce an authoritative statement of the knowledge and skills to be expected of a competent fire engineer. Again, I'm surprised that the Institution of Fire Engineering isn't mentioned by name in here, because again, they're describing things that body might do or could do, or if I was in that institution, I would want that to be our remit to make us more important and to enhance our standing. Surprised me a little bit that they haven't been. I presume they've been involved in the inquiry in some way.
I never saw any mention of them in any of the inquiry bits that I've seen.
Very strange. That seems to me to be very, very strange. I don't know whether they took the call to just avoid being involved at all because it was better. Yeah. I don't know. It's just feeling very strange. I would want to be absolutely as visible, to be like, yeah, we've been trying to offer this, but we have limited resources. And actually, if we were given greater resources and were supported more and given the legal status, actually, even the legal status would fix all the other problems, then we would be fulfilling many of these roles. So yeah, that surprises me.
I don't know enough about the IFE, even though I'm nominally a member.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I occasionally read the magazine. I don't pay it. I'll be honest.
Yeah, it's interesting because that kind of. Yeah, it's interesting. It did remind me a little bit of the way the ICE is, because the ICE are also the Institution of Civil Engineers. Well, I would call them my secondary professional institution now, because the PWI are so much better. But the IC often just don't seem to get involved in something anyway. I don't know. Some professional engineering institutions are created better than others. That's not casting any shade on the IFE. I just don't know. I'm just surprised at this point. Yeah. I'm just surprised that they're not visible here. So we also recommend that the government work in collaboration with industry and professional bodies encourage the development of courses in the principles of fire engineering for construction professionals and members of the fire and rescue services as part of their continuing professional development. Again, that's just classic PEI stuff. I teach, as part for the people I teach ethics and sustainability. And there are lots of other things we teach. It's good for professional engineering institutions to lead on their own education. Actually, I think that's a good thing. Just as they sign off on masters and other degree courses and programs, it makes sense for people who are outside of full-time education to have access directly to training that is done by the PEIs. That makes sense to me. Right, architects. I'm conscious of time, but I'm going to.
That's all right.
Going to ram us on to architects. So, talking of professionals, traditionally the role of architect has been fundamental to any construction project of any significant size. Regrettably, the work of Studio E on the Grenfell Tower refurbishment fell significantly below the standard reasonably to be expected of it in a number of significant ways. So, architects, okay, crikey. So let's have a look. We recognise that both the Architects Registration Board and the Royal Institute of British Architects have taken steps since the Grenfell Tower fire to improve the education and training of architects. We recommend that they should review the changes already made to ensure they're sufficient in the light of our findings. Absolutely. It's very similar to what we've just been talking about, except for architects who aren't engineers.
Yeah. They do have a legally protected
status
as to be an architect.
Yeah, it's weird.
Anyone can be an architectural technician or things of that, like architectural designer or any of that sort of thing.
But to be an architect, you need to have done the 7-year degree in Scotland. There's 6 years outside. So it's what I thought about, actually. Funnily enough, I'd probably do more. A lot of what I've ended up doing in my day job, it was erring towards more architecture than engineering in some ways, because I was doing a lot of high-level sort of stuff. Anyway, we also recommend that it be made a statutory requirement that an application for building control approval in relation to the construction or refurbishment of a high-risk building be supported by a statement from a senior manager of the principal designer under the Building Safety Act. That's a CDM thing. That all reasonable steps have been taken to ensure. Okay, so this recommendation is basically saying that there needs to be a statement. There needs to be a statement from the principal signed off by someone senior from the principal designer that all reasonable steps have been taken to ensure that the building will be safe as is required by the building regs. Kind of strange that doesn't exist, but okay. But it's just making explicit that connection.
Yeah, I think it
exists.
Nominally, the principal designer would be responsible for that under law, and it's just making sure that they are explicitly aware that they are taking responsibility for this, I guess, rather than just
For
taking
anyone,
responsibility by default
yeah,
because that is what the law says.
for anyone who wants to understand the CDM regs, Construction Design Maintenance Regulations 2015, go back to our Carmen derailment episode on it. I think one of the episodes specifically focuses on CDM and the failures relating to CDM at that point. But there are key legally defined roles. Principal designer, principal contractor are two very important and very set roles within those regulations, and I would guess that that's what this principal designer is referring to. Building Safety Act 2022 is not CDM, but I assume it's referring across that the principal designer role is
or
it
might have slightly, again, not practicing in the UK, not necessarily paid the most detail to every single related act of Parliament since I left, but I think it's essentially updating, clarifying some aspects of
that role. Yeah. I was going to say, because there's not
amongst other things, I'm sure.
CDM's now 10 years old, which is fine, you know. But that Act 2022 Act is obviously pretty recent, so I assume it just cross-referenced and clarified. Contractors, talking about contractors, here we go. Contractors, design and build form of contract, which is now very widely used, makes the principal contractor responsible for the whole range of activities related to the work, even though it invariably engages some subcontractors to carry out different aspects of it. We've gone through the pain that this caused in the previous episode, so I'm just going to jump to the recommendation. We recommend that a licensing scheme operated by the construction regulator be introduced for principal contractors wishing to undertake the construction or refurbishment of higher risk buildings, and that it be a legal requirement that any application for building control approval for the construction or refurbishment of a high risk building be supported by a personal undertaking from a director or senior manager of the principal contractor to take all reasonable care to ensure that on completion of handover the building that is safe as required by building regs. It's a very long recommendation, but basically it's saying two aspects there, which is create a licensing scheme for principal contractors for high risk buildings, bearing in mind that we've changed it, we want a better definition of high risk buildings, and also again it's restating the requirements of the principal contractor with sign-off. So that makes some sense. Next up, clients. Clients clearly not aware of their legal requirements. Actually, there's no requirement within this. So the events surrounding the refurbishment of Grenfell Tower suggest that at the time those who commissioned building work may not have been fully aware of their responsibility for compliance with the provisions of the building regulations. We therefore welcome the introduction by regulations made under the Building Safety Act 2022 of a requirement for a building regulations compliance statement made or approved by the client to be provided. So this is an interesting situation. Yeah, in the light of that requirement, we do not think that any further action in relation to clients is currently required. So this is a situation where there has been a preemptive call made by a piece of legislation that has kind of crossed off a recommendation that they might have otherwise have made, which is good, relating to clients. So clients... know what your responsibilities are, because you have some. If you're a client, you have responsibilities. You have legal responsibilities. That's true whether you're under CDM, whether you're under other forms of legislation, but certainly for projects that I'm dealing with, like the client organisation, which is often on the railways and it's often Network Rail, they have very specific... They have very specific requirements under law, things they have to provide, things they have to do, things they have to manage. And that's true across the buildings construction sector. Building control. So the evidence shows that in the period leading up to the fire, many of those involved in major construction projects, including clients, contractors, and even architects, regarded building control primarily as a source of advice and assistance. Okay, I'm going to jump to the recommendation, then we can go back again if it's kind of contextless. We recommend that the government appoint an independent panel to consider whether it is in the public interest for building control functions to be performed by those who have a commercial interest in the process. Oof, okay.
So this is to do with what are called approved inspectors.
Yeah.
For the life of me, I can't remember if it's England or England and Wales, because the weirdness of the UK is that England and Wales share lots of different things, but occasionally there's subtle differences, and then Northern Ireland and Scotland have their own aspects. But definitely in England, possibly in England and Wales, although I'm thinking of all the projects which I worked in Cardiff, it was local council building control. So I think it might just be England. But anyway, there are what is called approved inspectors who can do the building control job as well as local council. And it is up to the contractor or the client to decide on who they want to do their building control and they can protect a tender and get different offers, and then select who they want to do their building control, and then pay a fee for
the
building control. Now in Scotland you can't do that; it's just local government, and I think in Wales it might just be local government as well. But I'm not 100% sure if that's in England and Wales or just an England thing.
Yeah, okay.
So it is something that has always struck me as strange. I have been in the lucky position of all of the building control officers I worked with on my projects seemed competent and took their job seriously. At least when I engaged with me on fire-related aspects.
Yeah.
Can't guarantee they were on everything else, but the very nature of the fact that they were being paid by the person who was trying to build a building
does seem strange.
To get sign-off has always seemed like a significant conflict of interest, shall we say.
And given that we're supposed to call out our own conflict of interest, it feels strange for there to be an allowed process that literally creates one by its own inherent nature. So that's one recommendation that's very clear. The next one is the shortcomings we've identified in local authority building control suggest that in the interest of professionalism and consistency of service, all building control functions, including those currently performed by local authorities, should be exercised nationally. Accordingly, we recommend that the same panel consider whether all building control functions should be performed by a national authority. Interesting. So that's kind of an anti-devolution point there, in saying that actually it shouldn't be local authorities, it should be... I wonder if that's because local authorities are completely stripped bare, rather than because it's an inherent problem with local authorities.
I suspect there's part of that. I think it's one of those things as well, by the nature of there being approved inspectors who compete on price and possibly other things, shall we say? That means that local authority building control will often have less projects and therefore less income from those things and less resources to deal with them. And when you have that alongside the fact of all of the other issues of local authority funding that the UK's had for the last 15 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Who knows?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? So it's I suppose a situation where if local authorities don't have the diversity of projects, they don't have the number of projects, they don't necessarily therefore have the number of full-time equivalent staff to actually manage the whole lot. So having a national pool might resolve that problem. Yeah, okay. The next one, construction library. Those who design buildings, particularly high-risk and complex buildings, would benefit from having access to a body of information such as data from tests on products and materials, reports on serious fires, and academic papers. So the recommendation here is that the construction regulator sponsor the development of a similar library, perhaps as part of a joint project with the University of Queensland. So, what?
University of Queensland,
because they've done one before.
Huge amount of tests on stuff post Grenfell, because like lots of places in the world, Australia suddenly discovered that it had also all of this stuff on buildings,
and they wanted to understand it better.
Yeah, and so I don't know where all the funding for the University of Queensland tests would come from, but I wouldn't be surprised if some of that was Australian government funding. But anyway, they have been doing huge amounts.
So rather than relearning what is fire, does work the same in different places. Okay, the variables might change, but actually fire is fire. So.
The exact product brands and things will change, but even these days, I suspect a lot of they're global companies.
Yeah, exactly.
Quite a lot of them.
So provide a continuing resource for designers. That sounds like a good idea to me. Again, it should be managed by the construction regulator. There it is. And they should sponsor the development of a similar library. Good stuff. Okay, absolutely. Response to recommendations. Okay, interesting. Our investigations have revealed that some important recommendations affecting fire safety were ignored by the government in the years leading up to the Grenfell Tower fire. Recommendations made by the Select Committee in 1999 were not implemented, and the department's response to the recommendations made by the Lakanal House coroner was inadequate. The department had no system for recording recommendations made by public bodies or keeping track of the response to them. Oh, yeah.
See, also every other public inquiry ever.
Yes, that was obviously unsatisfactory. We recommend that it be made a legal requirement for the government to maintain a publicly accessible record of recommendations made by select committees, coroners and public inquiries, together with a description of the steps taken in response. Oh, that's a nice big broad one. Because that would hit one of things like the RAIB recommendations and AAIB recommendations recommendations would fall into that pile, because they ought to. That would be very good, yeah.
Probably.
If the government decides not to accept a recommendation, it should record its reasons for doing so. 2 right. Scrutiny of its actions should be a matter for Parliament, to which it should be required to report annually. Yeah, 2 right. It's a very straightforward thing. You just add the recommendations to a database, and it can be a bloody CSV. It just needs to then have the response, or if there isn't one. But it should be centrally administered. Yeah, absolutely. Very straightforward thing to do. Unfortunately, that is a massive tool to hold government accountable, and they hate those. This government, and as previous governments, hate other forms of good accountability that have been created, such as the Freedom of Information Act. They hate that. They absolutely hate it. And there are people in government who have become very, very good at working. Sue Gray is one of them, as working out ways to completely avoid FOI. And essentially, FOI doesn't exist for government departments anymore, because they basically just say, no, it's national security, or no, it's this, or no, it's that. Which is a problem. So this, I bet this won't happen, because this is too good a way to hold government accountable. I suspect they will shirk
I
this one.
suspect they may also not actually record their reasons for not doing so.
Quite, yes. Because what are the reasons for not doing so? Because their mates work in the companies, or because they feel, even if it's not sinister like that, even if it's like, if it's the excuse you might get from the current government is, well, it might stifle. We're worried that it might stifle growth. Capital G. It's like, yeah.
I suspect they'll
that
just
of
be
the
entirely ignored and pretended it never happened.
Yeah, quite. Fire risk assessors. So, recommendation related to fire risk assessors. We recommend that the government establish a system of mandatory accreditation to certify the competence of fire risk assessors by setting standards for qualification and continuing professional development, and such other measures as may be considered necessary or desirable. Yeah, so again, people who claim that they're fire risk assessors, as we remember earlier, there's a guy who claimed he was that and just had no competence whatsoever, no idea what he was doing, making up as he was going along. Fire control switches in lifts. Okay, we'll jump to this one. All modern lifts are fitted with fire control switches designed to be operated by drop keys to enable the fire and rescue services to take control of them in the event of a fire. The recommendation here is that government seeks urgent advice from the building safety regulator and the National Fire Chiefs Council on the nature and scale of the problem and appropriate response to it. The problem is,
in quick summary, the keys are not always the same pattern and size and style. It seems to vary with manufacturers, and while the fire service normally should have been providing individual firefighters with these keys, a lot of the time it was just left up to the firefighters to source the keys themselves, and then there was no guarantee that the key that they had would fit the lifts in the particular building they responded to.
That's a yikes from me.
That thing in a nutshell.
That's a useful summary. That sounds bad. So they're saying that they're not in a position to determine whether greater standardization of those switches is necessary, but we need to look into this because this is clearly a major shortcoming. Quite reasonable. Pipeline isolation valves, critical part of the gas distribution network because they are intended to supply to enable the supply of gas to be shut off quickly in an emergency. At the time of the fire at Grenfell,
under hard landscaping at Grenfell, so could it be?
Fantastic. They had been tarmacked over. To all intents and purposes. Fantastic. Excellent. We recommend that every gas transporter be required by law to check the accessibility of each such valve on its system at least once every 3 years and to report the results to the HSE as part of its gas safety case review. Oh my goodness, I've talked too much and I'm making myself yawn. Okay, crikey. Aging pipework. One of our expert witnesses drew attention to the danger posed by the fact that internal gas pipework in some older buildings does not sleeve where it passes through walls and floors, as is now required by the gas safety regulations 1972. That's not a new piece of legislation, folks.
No.
He considers that a more active approach to replacement should be taken to avoid a serious leak with potentially catastrophic consequences. Although we are not in a position to make a formal recommendation to that effect, we think that the HSE and other relevant bodies should give careful consideration to his evidence. They're just saying, this guy spoke to us and what he said was pretty scary. Maybe, guys, you should look into that, just as an FYI. Okay, noted. Social housing providers. This is another enormous yikes. However, no recommendations. So there's a decent... I'm not going to rerun what we did last episode, but there are no recommendations, which means that the Social Housing Regulation Act 2023 should have resolved some of the things they might have otherwise made recommendations around. So, okay. keep an eye on that one.
We shall see.
We shall see. Likewise, the LFB, London Fire Brigade. No doubt some of the criticisms we have made of the LFB could be made of other fire and rescue services, but in any event, we think that there is scope for all fire and rescue services to learn from each other's experience. So they're not making any recommendation. Oh, no, sorry, they are.
They are.
They are. That's the headline.
They've got
There's a load of them. Okay, yes. So
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay, yeah. So there's loads here.
9 subheadings, which all have at least one recommendation, and lots of them multiple.
Yes. So what I might do is skip through this, unless you think there's anything particularly pertinent. I might jump through this.
To be honest, I think if you read the introductory section, gives you an idea of the sort of things that might come up. Basically, it's management of. It's not. There's no criticism of individual firefighters or even of individual incident commanders on the day or the control room members, even though all of these aspects went wrong in some way.
Yeah.
It's the bureaucracy and the management and the structure of the brigade put these people all in places where they didn't have appropriate tools to deal with the situation, essentially. It's how do you solve that at a structural level? Which I suspect that rings true for various parts of your industry as well.
Very much does, yeah. And then the next section, so jumping through that, the next section is response and recovery, and it refers to... So there are a lot of recommendations and go into some detail through this that I think we won't dwell in detail on, even though there's a lot that's worth going through and is interesting. I think it's been interesting to look at the construction stuff because I think that goes across engineering and there's a lot of pertinence there. The response and recovery stuff is absolutely pertinent, and particularly to railways and accidents in railways. But I'll maybe just quickly go through and pick up give an example of some of the recommendations. So, for example, there's the Civil Contingencies Act, which deals with responses to emergencies. But one of the things they realise is that if you have what's called a Category 1 responder who should be taking control of or rather than taking control, but is not responding appropriately, they word it as failing to rise to the challenge, then they can be. Then the Secretary of State is able to take over those powers in its place for a short period of time. So those are the sorts of recommendations, things like
there's lots of political structure and I guess.
Yeah, things like guidance related to gold arrangements. So anyone who's familiar with emergency responses in the railways to railway crashes and serious incidents, gold command is a structure of gold command is part of how you respond to
political and organizational structural stuff.
Yeah, in response to an emergency. And then the local authority section of this is relating to the response and recovery, but this is now talking about the recovery for the most part. RBKC does not. I'm not going to go into the detail of this because I don't think it's. I think we could dedicate an entire episode just to RBKC, but it's not good, folks. It really is not good. No. They do not come out of this well. No effective means of collecting and recording information about those who have been displaced from the tower and surrounding buildings, including those who are missing. That's just one sentence. I've just picked that sentence out, but I just find that completely appalling. The fact that they did not render effective humanitarian assistance as the body that's responsible for the people living within its boundaries, shocking. And then the last section here is specifically about vulnerable people. And the two recommendations are that further consideration needs to be given to the recommendations made in the Phase 1 report in the light of our findings in this report. So it's like you've not acted on the recommendations of Phase 1 report yet. Do that. And we also recommend the advice contained in paragraph 79.11 of the Local Government Authority Guide be reconsidered. So it's relating to the management and care of vulnerable people and the plans to look after them in an emergency like this. And that is that's the summary report. Those are the recommendations. It is let's just get our large faces up. There's a lot there. There is a lot there. It makes for grim reading, but the key thing now is that the government is held responsible for acting on those recommendations, and that's the bit that worries me. Is that there's a very good recommendation about the recommendations there that government must be held accountable for acting on the recommendations or telling us why it hasn't. That's a really key one to pay attention to, isn't it? Really. Yeah.
That feels like if that was achieved, if nothing else, it would be significant progress.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. If nothing else, that in and of itself would be like severe, like serious progress. But will it happen? Yeah, I don't know.
I won't hold
do you have? I mean, yeah. Obviously, we'll go into the outro in a minute. But do you have anything that you feel like we've not covered? Anything that from the first episode that you were in the chat for that you feel like you wanted to say, or anything, any kind of broad feelings or themes that you don't think we've touched on yet that you want to round out on?
No, not really. I think for me, the biggest part of it all, and the reason why there's multiple reasons, but from an engineering point of view, one of the biggest failures as the industry as a whole, and this goes for people calling themselves engineers, people calling themselves fire assessors, the architects, so on and so forth, is understanding what you are competent at.
Yeah.
Understanding your design and thinking about any tools and guidance you're using to help you with that design, and where you realize it is outside of something that you can do, getting someone else to help you do it, who can do it.
I always say that the most important thing that engineers have, and I dare say this goes for other practitioners as well, but for engineers, the most important thing we have is our network of skilled people we know. Knowing where your limitations are, knowing who you can contact. The thing that makes engineers the best engineers is that they know people who do know the answer. It's not that they think they know all the answers, it's that they know people who they have confidence in being competent to deliver the complete solution, the safe solution. To be honest, it's a really nice way to round out that. Understand the limits of your competence, the limits of the tools you're using, the limits of the guidance you're following. Absolutely. Yeah, I don't think we can end in a better way than that, other than this is a really grim, appalling saga. In terms of the big picture stuff about how this represents the kind of the continuing decline of the country, well, we'll leave that for other podcasts. But I think most people watching this will understand that they're particularly in episode 240, where we went through that cascade of grim prioritization of market values and sort of private interests over the interests of people who just wanted to live in a house. They just wanted to have a home. Is appalling, and an absolute stain on right up to the Prime Minister's office. And continues to be. Yeah, cheerful stuff. It's important that we learn from it, though, Al. Right? It's there's no point us just being grimly unhappy and saying, well, this will never get fixed. Well, no, because we all, certainly you or I and the people within our sector, have the power to push hard for this stuff to be fixed. We have a lot of power. If the last year has taught me that we all have a lot of power if we wield it appropriately and speak up. So Al, I'm gonna go back to Big Face again. No, not bloody. I keep pressing. I haven't had a guest for so long. I keep making my large face appear, which is the last bloody thing people want to see. Although equally, either of our faces are the last thing people want to see. Yeah. No. The usual.
There's been more attractive guests, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. The usual outros. I'm up to date with the audio version of the podcast, which is nice. So that's good. In fact, I said that. I'm recording this on a Wednesday, but this is a pre-record, of course, so I will be up to date still. Good. Anyway, the usual plugs: GarethDennis.co.uk/merch for the merchandise, PayPal.me/GarethDennis for loose change and abuse, Patreon.com/GarethDennis for supporting this to happen forever and ever, and GarethDennis.co.uk/Discord for the chat. Hello, everyone in the chat, to continue forever and ever. Also, lots of infinity situations going on here. The book is going to be on tour. Pay attention to the dates coming out. The confirmation of all this coming up soon. 10 dates across the UK where I will be doing book-related things with a cool person joining me. One of those already confirmed.
Touring Europe.
I am going to be popping up in a couple of places in Europe for events that I've been booked at. Yes, there are a couple of European events. I'm in Antwerp, for example, in a few months. But yes, I do also need to go over to Malmö. I mean,
do.
there are 6.5 years worth of bad excuses for why I've not come over, but that's another story for another time. My lack of capability as a socialite and a friend is not for discussion in this podcast. It's for discussion in the Discord server. The last episode that I did. I mean, I'm conscious that I will have said all this in the previous live episode that is going out that I haven't actually recorded yet because it's the middle of the day on Wednesday. It's lunchtime, but go and catch all of my episodes of W2IP if you want to do that. I'm no longer a host of one of my favourite podcasts, which is sad but necessary because I could not do it whilst also having a day job. Impossible number of hours. Alastair, it's a little plug for you.
Listen to it as for fun.
And I get to listen to it. I get to just listen to it as a listener once more, rather than listening to me being in it, which I always did anyway, and will continue to if I guest. It doesn't mean I'm never going to appear on it again. Everyone, I will be guesting on it, I'm sure. But in fact, Ross has already messaged me several things like we should have you on as a guest for this. I'm like, Ross, let Victoria Scott on first at least. Anyway, right. So Al, you are an engineer, but you also are, as with a large engineering is a creative field, and so often it's the case that engineers end up doing creative stuff, whether it's musical or whether it's whatever the hell I do, or being an artist like you do lots of artistic things. So I don't know. What are your latest project? I don't know if what projects are currently going on, but nothing.
Not a huge amount. I keep on meaning. Well, I've got there's one of the things I've done for as long as you've known, longer than you've known me. You may remember, is sort of international art collectives.
Yes,
where lots of
there was one called Illuminarium,
like
and there's another one called I can't remember the other one, but the other one I think is like there are multiple art collectives that you're involved in.
Where people like myself, a mix of hobbyists and the odd professional artist and illustrator gets mucked in as well. We put together online exhibitions of stuff. At the moment, my main focus is on fixing the website for one. It's called Project Aurora, which has meant that I haven't actually done much art itself. But I do, as can be seen on the screen.
All sorts of different creative things that people can go and enjoy.
Shiny things,
big things, even bigger things, and small things as well.
And things that are just pretty pictures. Sometimes it's fun.
Absolutely.
Sometimes there's meaning. Sometimes there's a story. Sometimes it just
you do stuff because you can. And these things have featured on book covers and album covers, and I don't know whether you get to call yourself as someone who's now an author. I don't know what the rules are about that, but once you've done it once and got paid for it, I presume that means, I've been a professional writer for a long time, but now I'm a professional author. If you've been on a book cover, I think you get to call yourself a professional artist as well, even if it's part-time. Probably.
Even if the last book was before I moved to Sweden, so shall we say?
a little while ago, But anyway, so there you go. That's
last indie published book was before I moved to Sweden.
Okay, noted. But any other plugs that you want to do while you're, is there, the day job work? Is there interesting resources that people can tap into, or they will never see any of them because this is just research that's going on, and that's fine.
So everything that Rise does, so the ri.se for those who are interested, everything the Research Institute does, all our reports are open access, which you can find there. So there's that for anyone that's interested in that. And that covers, the Research Institute covers literally everything you can think of, from the fire stuff that I do through to things about food.
Oh wow, okay. Oh yeah,
sustainability and all sorts of stuff like that, through the current craze that is AI, through everything is Rise is a amalgamation of lots of separate research institutes, basically. Most were probably, 30-40 years ago owned by the Swedish state, and then got privatized, and now are all owned again by the Swedish state.
Well, that's at least the trajectory is the correct one at the moment, although who knows with the Swedish government at the moment. Well, mentioning AI, just for anyone worried, no, the images on here are absolutely not AI generated. I can promise you that.
Yes.
I know what Al's views on this are. However, all of them will have been, without Al's choice, assimilated into generative AI models without any choice whatsoever, because the only way to stop that happening, oh no, there isn't. The internet just got eaten several times. So great. Generative AI is a disease, and the sooner rid of it, the better. Anyway, the last thing I want to say is that I haven't. The title card for this will get updated in post. But episode 253 next week is going to be another pre-record, I think, and I'll be finally putting up my episode about Shildon's new hall, which I walked around in like 3 months ago, but I just haven't got around to putting the episode together. The new hall. The opening of the new hall, which has nearly 50 vehicles in it, makes locomotion up in Shildon the largest undercover collection of historic railway vehicles in Europe. So it's a very cool building, and it's also my favourite bit of the whole Railway Museum campus, including Shildon and York. Second favourite bit. The open stores in York are still my favourite bit, but the new gallery is really fantastic, and I've already talked about it. I just need to edit the video together to tell you all, but that will be next week. So, while I get our large faces up, Al, you've taken way too much of your time, but I'll let you go back to work, lunch, and the rest. A pleasure to see everyone. I'm going to say cheerio. We'll see you next week. Al won't, because he's going to just do work and live life.
Bye-bye.
But that's fine. Bye bye. Cheerio.